Hiromitsu's living room was a wreck. Shattered glass, overturned furniture, dust in the air from the earthquake. He barely had time to take in the chaos before the tsunami siren pierced the silence. He bounded up the stairs, yelling for his wife, Yuko, as he rushed to the second-floor terrace. And then he froze. It was too late. The wave was already there, a towering wall of water that had just swallowed the neighbor's house whole. Clutching each other tightly, Hiromitsu and Yuko turned to face the mountains, too afraid to look at the sea that was about to consume them. Friday, March 11, 2011 began like any other early spring morning for 60-year-old Hiromitsu Shinkawa. He rose with the sun, dressed quickly, and stepped out into the crisp, salt-tinged air to tend his pigeons in the barn. After caring for his flock, he returned home for a simple breakfast before kissing his wife Yuko goodbye and telling her he loved her. Hiromitsu left his seaside home and drove across the scenic city of Miromisoma in Fukushima Prefecture. At the lumberyard, he greeted his co-workers before slipping into the steady rhythm of his work, feeding thick tree trunks through the table saw, transforming them into clean-cut planks. It was tough physical labor that left his hands calloused and his back sore by sunset, but it was honest work. Coupled with the harvest from his rice farm, he helped support the quiet life he and Yuko had built together. Then at 2:46 p.m. local time, the ground convulsed. A sudden jolt caused by a powerful earthquake nearly knocked Hiromitsu off his feet. He and his co-workers dove for cover, keeping clear of the towering stacks of lumber around them. The earth had turned into a moving sea of concrete and dust, and the shaking didn't stop. It went on and on for 3 excruciating minutes. The world refused to stay still. Aside from a few bruises and shaken nerves, Hiromitsu and his co-workers were safe. They gathered around to listen to the news. A 9.0 undersea earthquake had struck in the Pacific Ocean, 45 miles east of the Tohoku region in northeast Japan, and tsunamis were highly likely. Hiromitsu frantically tried to call Yuko, but the phones were down. His boss urged everyone to go check on their families, and the workers scattered. Some sprinted toward higher ground, already fearing the worst. Hiromitsu hesitated. There was no guarantee that a tsunami would hit. Just 2 days earlier, a warning had come and gone without incident. Still, uncertainty gnawed at him. He turned the key in the ignition and made a decision. He would go home. He would check to see if Yuko was there and maybe grab a couple of heirlooms before heading for higher ground. The drive home was anything but easy. Downed power lines snaked across the road and fallen trees blocked entire lanes. In one stretch, the asphalt had crumbled away, leaving a jagged hole in the earth. Buildings were piles of splintered wood and shattered glass. When Hiromitsu finally reached home, his elderly parents were just leaving. They were heading to his uncle's house on higher ground and urged him to come with them. Before he could answer, Yuko's car pulled into the driveway. Hiromitsu told his parents to go ahead and promised them that he and Yuko would follow soon. Yuko had spent the morning shopping, then going to the gym. She'd barely felt the quake and hadn't realized how serious it was until she saw the devastation on the drive back. In the back of her car were 4 12-pound bags of rice seedlings. Despite the growing danger, Yuko insisted on placing them in the barn, hoping that they'd be out of harm's way. Back inside, Hiromitsu scanned the wreckage of his living room. The Buddhist altar had been upended, and papers along with shards of glass from a shattered picture frame were scattered across the floor. He tried to focus, but the piercing wail of the tsunami warning siren shattered his thoughts. Moving fast, he rushed to the kitchen and grabbed what he could. 3 cans of energy drinks from the fridge, a box of caramels from the shelf, and he shoved them into his pocket before rushing upstairs to assess the damage. Hiromitsu stepped out onto the second-floor terrace. Hiromitsu looked toward Kumini Mountain, and his stomach dropped. A wall of water was coming straight toward him. A house further down the street floated past, ripped from its foundation. He turned south to his left. Everything there was still untouched, but the roaring grew louder with each passing second. Hiromitsu cried out for Yuko. She joined him on the terrace, wrapping her arms around his waist. The wave was coming. There was no time to run. Holding each other tight, Hiromitsu and Yuko turned to look at the mountains, too afraid to watch the surge of water that would soon overtake them. In an instant, everything went black. The icy water struck Hiromitsu like a truck, slamming into his body and tossing him around. He was disoriented, unable to tell which way was up. His lungs burned. He wanted to scream, but he knew that if he opened his mouth, he would drown. Through the chaos, Hiromitsu caught a faint glimmer, lighter-colored water above him. He scissor-kicked toward it, his body aching, fighting to stay alive. The darkness shifted from black to gray, and then a murky green. He was seeing sunlight filtering through the water. With the last of his strength, he kicked harder and harder until his head broke the surface. He spluttered and gulped in the air, exhausted. Looking around, Hiromitsu spotted a large sheet of metal floating about 20 feet away. He paddled through the debris-filled water, thrashing to reach it. As he got closer, he realized it was a rectangular section of the white tin roof that had once crowned his home. With great effort, Hiromitsu struggled onto the roof. He curled into a ball, gripping the edge of the metal, lying there, panting, trying to catch his breath. He cautiously sat up and surveyed his surroundings. There were no buildings or recognizable landmarks in sight. The only thing visible was the very top of a telephone pole, a grim reminder of how high the water had surged. The raging current hurled Hiromitsu inland, carrying him toward the mountains. Clinging to the roof beneath him, he scanned the landscape, searching for somewhere that he could leap and grab hold. But there was nothing. There was nowhere that looked safe enough to risk the jump. Then the current shifted, and the waves dragged him out to sea. His tiny roof-turned raft spun through a dizzying sea of oily black water and debris. Hiromitsu looked back toward the coastline. It was dotted with fires, tendrils of thick black smoke curling upward, scarring the blue sky. And then a sound. The whirl of a helicopter echoed overhead. Hiromitsu sprang to life, waving, shouting, his voice raw with hope. He wanted to stand, to make himself seen. He stayed low and shouted louder. The helicopter passed. It wasn't the last. Over the next 3 days, he spotted more helicopters, planes, and even distant ships. Each time, he did everything he could to attract their attention, but it was always in vain. Hiromitsu took stock of the situation. While the dips and swells of the water were strong, the open water was calmer than the chaos that had surged along the shore. He relaxed his death grip on the roof and flexed his aching hands. Settling himself in the middle of the roof, he assumed a cross-legged meditative pose. Miraculously, the only things he lost were his left shoe and a box of caramels. Thankfully, the 3 cans of energy drinks were still stuffed in his pockets. At first, he hadn't felt the cold. He had been running on adrenaline, but now his body felt stiff and numb. Carefully, he eased off his jacket and spread it out to dry. Hiromitsu thought of Yuko. Could she have survived too? The last thing that he had said to her just before the wave overtook them was that they would be all right. He tried not to dwell on what might have happened to her. His thoughts also turned to his parents. Had they made it to higher ground before the tsunami struck? Hiromitsu closed his eyes and pictured Minamisoma, the peaceful coastal city with its small wooden homes and gray-tiled roofs, rising gently above a patchwork of lush green rice fields, all cradled by the Abukumo mountain range. He imagined the fishermen in their brightly painted boats setting out at dawn, and the farmers hunched over their rows of rice shoots. He thought of his own family's paddy. He was a 4th-generation rice farmer, the quiet koi pond in his front yard, and the old barn where he kept his pigeons. Hiromitsu's life, while not perfect, had been deeply satisfying. Now it was forever changed. At sunset, Hiromitsu cracked open the first energy drink and slowly sipped it, hoping to ease the gnawing ache in his belly. He tilted his head back, draining every last drop. From time to time, a low rumbling echoed beneath him, and the water surged. Aftershocks. He tried not to dwell on it. There was nothing he could do but ride it out. Bobbing in the water nearby, a small red marker pen floated past. Hiromitsu reached out and grabbed it. He popped off the cap and scribbled on his finger. It worked. The seal had held. Not far off, he spotted a blanket tangled in debris. He hauled it aboard, wrung it out best he could, and laid it out to dry. As the night wore on, Hiromitsu was lulled to sleeplessness by the rocking of the waves. He had once seen a survival TV show that gave tips on staying alive. The first rule was not fall asleep, so Hiromitsu tried to stay awake. He sang songs from his high school days, tunes he'd heard on the radio, and melodies passed down from his parents long ago. He sang Waltz on a Starlit Night, a sad song about someone losing their love. It stung Hiromitsu. He was worried he would never see Yuko again. As the temperature dropped, Hiromitsu curled into a tight ball, pulling his knees to his chest and tucking his hands into his thighs, trying to conserve his heat. He only stopped singing when his throat began to hurt. Hiromitsu was relieved to see the dawn break. It was March 12th. Only yesterday he had kissed his wife goodbye as he left for work, possibly for the last time. He was cold, hungry, and aching. His lips were cracked and dry. His salt-encrusted clothes itched against his skin. A nerve in his hand had been bruised by the impact, and now his fingers were swelling, stiff and uncooperative. The sea had calmed, but he was caught in a slow whirlpool of drifting wreckage. Water stretched endlessly in every direction. The sun shimmered off the waves, hurting his eyes. Suddenly, a deep boom echoed across the water. Hiromitsu saw a plume of smoke rise near the Fukushima nuclear power plant. More explosions followed, smaller, sharper cracks, and then a thick rust-colored cloud began to swell upward, dominating the sky. Time dragged on. The thirst was unbearable. At one point, unable to hold it in any longer, Hiromitsu relieved himself, and then in a moment of sheer survival, he cupped his hands and drank his own urine. He would repeat this grim action twice more before he was rescued. From the stew of debris surrounding the raft, Hiromitsu flushed out torn pages of a manga from the water. He also found a white hard hat, which he promptly placed on his head. Along with it, he retrieved a red container that had once held paint and a tatami mat, woven together with string. Hiromitsu hunched over the comic book pages and with great care used the red marker to write the following words on the margin. On March 11th, I was with my wife Yuko. My name is Hiromitsu. Afterward, he tore off the paper, folded it, and placed it in the red canister. He sealed it tightly and, using the string from the mat, tied it across his body like a utility belt. Helicopters continued to fly overhead, sweeping the coastline in search of survivors. With each pass, they flew a little closer to the shore. Hiromitsu waved his arms, shouting with everything he had left, hoping to be seen. The same went for passing boats. Whenever one appeared on the horizon, he stood, waved, and called out over the water, but every time they moved on. Hours passed. Hiromitsu continued to fish more objects out of the ocean as they floated by, including a futon and blankets. He laid them in the sun to dry. He wrote another note in the comic book. I just want to report that I am alive on the 12th and was with my wife Yuko yesterday. She was born January 12th of Showa 26. He again folded the page, placed it in an empty energy drink can, and strapped it to his chest. Hiromitsu finally cracked open the second energy drink and slowly sipped it, making it last as long as he could. As he surveyed the water, a fat statuette of Daikoku, the god of fortune, bobbed by. Hiromitsu wanted to bring it aboard the roof, but hesitated. He worried about losing his balance. Instead, he decided to take it as a good omen. The night of March 12th was rough. Hiromitsu was exhausted. The stench of oil hung heavily in the air, and the air temperature dropped to freezing. Despite being wrapped in the blankets that he had found, he couldn't stop shaking. He craved sleep and occasionally drifted off, only to jolt himself awake. The sea around him shimmered with the eerie phosphorescent glow of jellyfish, but Hiromitsu was too tired to care. His hand throbbed, his eyes were growing blurry, itchy, and running. He had probably picked up an infection when his eyes had been exposed to the dirty water. He didn't sing that night. Instead, he thought and he remembered stories from his youth. He imagined himself as the hero, surviving catastrophes only to suffer the irony of fate and die from something simple: dehydration, hypothermia, or organ failure. As Hiromitsu's third day on the raft dawned, he realized that he had another problem. The wood of the roof had become waterlogged, weak, and rotten. Soon pieces began to break off. Hiromitsu wrote SOS on a chunk of wood. Unable to wait until midday, he fumbled for the third energy drink, opened it, and put it to his cracked lips, slurping it greedily, unable to moderate himself. Hiromitsu was now having waking dreams. He began to hallucinate. He was convinced that he could see a dead body coming closer, bobbing near the raft. He started to scream. The sound was thin and hoarse, but the body turned out to just be a tree trunk. Hiromitsu sat cross-legged on the raft in a meditative pose. He was too weak to stand, his arms and legs swollen. His lower half was damp. Water bubbled up between the planks and scraps of corrugated tin. How long until the raft fell apart? He couldn't stop shaking. His joints ached. He thought about just letting go, slipping soundlessly into the water. Then he would see his beloved Yuko again. Hiromitsu wrote a last note to his parents. I'm in a lot of trouble. Sorry for dying before you. Please forgive me. On the horizon, Hiromitsu spotted a large ship. He blinked, unsure if it was real or just another hallucination. But then he heard the low hum of a propeller cutting through the stillness. With what little strength he had, Hiromitsu hauled himself up to his feet, hoarsely shouting, waving a makeshift flag made from a scrap of red blanket tied to a stick. The boat seemed to travel on. Hiromitsu sank to his knees in despair. But the vessel, a maritime self-defense force destroyer, had seen him. It sent out a lifeboat. Again, Hiromitsu wondered if he was hallucinating. The boat reached him, and the green-suited rescuers in gray life vests leaned over his raft. Hiromitsu croaked, "Help me." One rescuer, stunned, immediately wrapped him in blankets and handed him an energy drink. Hiromitsu took a long, thirsty gulp and burst into tears. Back aboard the destroyer, Hiromitsu was given a warm bath, and the crew radioed for a helicopter. He was airlifted to a hospital outside the Fukushima radiation zone, where doctors treated him for dehydration and exhaustion. He was tested for radiation exposure, but thankfully the levels were insignificant. His recovery was swift. Hiromitsu was quietly bemused by all the attention. Images of the lone man on a roof, dragged 9 miles out to sea and found on the third day, when almost no other survivors were left, had stunned the world. Hiromitsu was reunited with his parents and had a second, more painful reunion with his daughter, where he haltingly told her the story of the last minutes of her mother's life. Like many others, Yuko was never found. Hiromitsu now lives in a quiet suburb of Tokyo in an anonymous 8-story apartment complex subsidized by the government for earthquake survivors. His days are simple. He takes long walks, sings karaoke with his neighbors, sweeps the sidewalk in front of his building, and spends time with his daughter and young grandson. He's also found a passion for writing. Before the tsunami, he was never much for writing poetry, but now, something about the ocean opened a well inside him, releasing a fountain of words within him. He feverishly scribbles, journals, poetry, memories, whatever pops into his head. He tries to live every day as a gift. And Yuko is never far from his thoughts. He speaks to her often. In his heart, she's still there, watching over him. Across the region, thousands shared Hiromitsu's pain. Over 15,000 lives were lost, entire communities vanished beneath the waves, and a nation was left mourning amid the wreckage. The cost of the devastation ran into the hundreds of billions, but the impact went far beyond numbers. The Tohoku earthquake and tsunami left deep scars, not just on the land, but on the families left to pick up the pieces. The Tohoku disaster didn't end with the tsunami. The real nightmare began after the waves hit. Watch how the Fukushima disaster actually happened to see how it went from bad to worse.